Okay, here we are. Happy Friday, everyone. We are live. Healthy for the Holidays, day 8. All right, day 8. Yeah, we're on day 8. Awesome. So I'm going to recap the week and recap the challenge and answer a few of your questions. And then we'll send you on for a happy, healthy weekend. And we will start a new challenge on Monday. So as a recap for this week's challenge, remember, you were asking yourself, is it worth it? Now, I think one of the things to be really clear about is that the intention was not that you would be perfect in asking that question and then, changing your behavior. The intention is to start having you practice being intentional, and being mindful about your decisions and realizing that you do have the capacity to interrupt this automaticity and habitual behavior that you have engaged in for so long. You do have the capacity to do that, but that doesn't we don't just flip a switch and then have that capacity change. That takes practice. And so the question of, is it worth it, is the act of practicing being intentional about your choices with food. As a reminder, those choices and the answer to that question, is it worth it, could change from day to day, hour to hour. And so the idea is that we don't get attached to the answer of that question. In other words, if you asked yourself on Monday if that piece of Halloween candy was worth it to you, and on Monday you said yes, that's not your answer. That's just your answer for Monday, right? And that's just your answer for that moment on Monday. And so we want to make sure that we don't sort of attach a meaning to that. The point is not finding the answer. The point is the process of finding the answer, right? Of staying connected to the process. So it might change, like I said, from hour to hour and day to day. A couple of you asked, what if I keep answering that it's not worth it, and then I do it anyways, right? And the answer to that is, the answer to that truly is stay with it. Stay with this Healthy for the Holidays challenge, because I'm going to be going into some of that in later weeks. And that has to do with a couple of things. As I mentioned before this week, usually for me, when someone says, you know what, I know that it's not worth it, but I keep doing it anyways, it's a couple of things going on. Number one, it can be a lack of clarity about what you want, right? And so if you're super hazy or confused about what it is that you want and why, it's got to go beyond, I want to lose 10 pounds. That's not enough. That's not clear. That doesn't really say anything. We need to get clarity about what it is that you actually want. The only reason why you want to lose 10 pounds is because you think that there's something on the other side of it. So we have to get really clear about that. And then we need to start looking at where there's cognitive dissonance. In other words, I keep saying I want this thing, but I keep doing something else. We got to look at where the disconnect is there. We're going to do some of that in later challenges. The other thing that I look at when someone says, I do ask myself if it's worth it and it's not, and then I eat it anyways, is I bring up the physiological impact of food. And actually, this goes really well into one of the questions that I'm answering from another group, is that, and I won't go too much into the science lesson about processed foods and sugar, salt, sugar, fat, and processed foods and the way that they are combined. But just take away that the unnatural combination of processed foods, whether that be salty foods like popcorn, chips, crackers, those kinds of things, or whether they be sweet foods like candy, ice cream, whatever, you name it. The unnatural combination of the foods and the way that those foods stimulate different parts of our brain, one of those parts specifically being the bliss point, hijack the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for making decisions that are in our best interest. So the prefrontal cortex is part of the executive functioning part of your brain, and it is responsible for foreseeing the consequences of your behavior. It's responsible for making decisions in line with what you want. It's responsible for weighing the pros and cons and then making a decision in favor of, all these things. The executive functioning part of your brain is responsible for making responsible decisions. And when you eat a lot of processed foods, it hijacks that part of your brain. You have less access to the part of your brain that is making good decisions for you. So when we get into the candy and when we're consistently stimulated by the chips and the candy and things like that, it makes it harder to make good decisions for ourselves. So when I tell people to focus first, whenever people are asking me about nutrition, again, I don't give meal plans. I don't give those kinds of things because they're a dime a dozen. And quite frankly, meal plans are only as good as you implementing them. That's a whole topic for a whole nother day. But what I do tell people is that there's an impact on us from a physiological, mental, and emotional standpoint when we start to get into a bunch of processed foods. I'm not sitting here telling you never to eat processed foods, but what I'm telling you is that you might find that you have a challenge in managing your intake, your quantity, the amount you're eating, the number of times you're eating it if you are eating a lot of processed foods, because that part of your brain that is really good at understanding consequences of behavior or telling you not to do things gets hijacked. You have less access to it. It just makes it harder on yourself. It makes it harder for you to make good decisions. And so for someone who is saying, I look at it and I ask myself if it's worth it and I eat it anyways, is what you're eating a processed food? Is it sugar? Is it candy? Is it ice cream? It's going to be harder. Your brain is triggered unnaturally by those foods to eat them. And it's not just after you've actually eaten it. There are a lot of good studies to support that once your brain gets the message that it likes the processed food, all you have to do is think about or look at the food and the brain starts triggering you to eat it, starts activating those pathways that say, oh yeah, we really like that, keep going. And so when those get really strong, it gets harder for us to say, it gets harder for us to act in a way that's in our best interest. Now, does that mean it's impossible? No. Does that mean that you shouldn't still try? No, it's just, I want you to know what's going on. It's not just your desire that's being activated. It's not just your conscious decision-making that we're relying on here. We're also relying on you to know that your desire might be getting activated in a physiological way that is making it harder for you to say no to the candy. So all the more reason for you to put context in place that is going to help you make a better decision. We're going to be talking about that as we go along here in this series. And when I talk about putting context in place to help you make a better decision, it is not about diet. It is not about restriction. It is not about deprivation. It's not because you can't have candy. It's not because of all of these factors that go into our decision-making process when we are eating food. And those factors go well beyond, does it fit my macros, or does it have too many calories? Those are super very superficial questions, honestly. Where our decision-making process comes in when we're making decisions about food, really go back into brain neural pathways, dopamine activation, habituation parts of the brain, automaticity parts of the brain, the parts of the brain that have been conditioned to have a conditioned response in response to the sight of a food. I mean, this is cognitive neuroscience. That's how you make decisions about food. So if we're, just looking at a meal plan and going, is it on my meal plan? And how many calories do I have left? It's a really superficial line of questioning. And so when I'm asking you to do these challenges, it is helping you to get the practice of the layers underneath that basic level of cognitive functioning, if that makes sense. Trying not to get too heavy and deep in the science, since we only have, 10 or 15 minutes together. I don't like to leave you all with more questions than answers. But the big takeaway is, if you're finding yourself blowing through those cues of it's not worth it, but I'm eating it anyway, check how much processed food is in your life. sugar begets sugar, processed food begets processed food. It's harder to stop eating it because it is designed to trigger an unnatural part of your brain. Not only is it designed that way, but also when we put these things unnaturally together, it has that effect on our brain, okay? And then the other piece is we might have fuzzy clarity about where we're trying to go with this. Why am I trying to lose 10 pounds? Why do I track my food? If that's fuzzy, your motivation to say no to the candy is going to be lower than your motivation to indulge in the pleasure. It's a topic for a whole nother day about how you get pushed above or below the action line based on your motivation in that moment. But just know that we might need to have some clarity, and we'll work on that in the coming weeks. Okay, to give you a tool to work on, if you find yourself consistently eating the candy, even though you said you didn't want it, here is a tool for you, and that's called mental rehearsal. Mental rehearsal will sound kind of silly, and you might roll your eyes and go, that's dumb, why would I even do that? But as you know, from a neuroscience nerd standpoint, there is some very good science to back up mental rehearsal. Why? Because you want to be wiring a new pathway when it comes to that trigger food. So for instance, let's say that you keep walking by the pantry at 7 o'clock at night and digging your hand into the chocolate bin. And then you find yourself eating 4 or 5 pieces of chocolate and you're frustrated with yourself. You want to stop doing that. Then you tell yourself you're going to stop doing it. And you're going to stop doing it. You're going to stop doing it. And then every night you find yourself going into the candy. You can't get yourself to stop doing it, even though you want to, even though you said that's what you wanted to do. Mental rehearsal would look like in a time where you are feeling a high level of motivation or a clear head, maybe in the morning, you want to walk over to the pantry area and say something like, I am going to choose not to eat the candy, or I am going to choose a better choice for myself, or I am going to choose to have tea or something, whatever it is, moving you away from grabbing the candy, okay? You walk over to the pantry, I'm going to choose gum instead, whatever. Then you walk away and you walk back to the candy. I'm going to choose gum instead. Then you walk away. Then you walk back to the candy. I'm going to choose gum instead. Do it 7 times. I know that sounds kind of ridiculous, but rehearsing yourself in the situation, behaving the way that you want to behave, starts to form that neural pathway of what am I supposed to do in this situation right now? And currently your neural pathway is formed to the habituation of eating the candy, right? So you go over to the candy at night and you pull it out of the bin and you eat it. That's part of that is habituation. And so if you want to do it differently, then you have to rehearse a new way of being. So in a time where you feel pretty confident that you're not going to be eating the candy, rehearse not eating the candy around 7 times and see if it becomes easier for you that night to stay away from the candy if that's what you want. Okay. Okay. The last thing that I will say, 2 other questions that you guys had for me. One of you asked about kind of weight creep. In other words, I was at a pretty normal, healthy weight, and then it just sort of crept on. What's that all about? And here's what I'll say. A couple of things when somebody says that to me is we have to understand the biology of your weight, which is that your body is constantly seeking food. The body is designed to search out food and understand where it is, and it's constantly looking for it and seeking it. That's the way that we survived. We'll go into all of the physiology there. So we have a natural tendency towards food, and in that combined with our modern food environment sets us up pretty easily to just overconsume. And it doesn't take that much to overconsume, right? So I'm a pretty short person. I'm barely 5'4". I call myself 5'4", but I don't even know if I really am. And so my body really just from an energetic standpoint doesn't need as many calories as somebody who is 5'7", 5'8", 5'9", my husband who's over 6 feet, right? It just, from a simple energetic exchange. My body doesn't need that much energy for fuel to run the way that somebody else does. And if I go to a restaurant and just eat what's served in front of me, I'm probably eating more than half my calories, if not all of my calories for the day, just by sitting at that restaurant and doing nothing. I'm not even, ordering the chocolate cake and binging on potato chips. I'm just eating what was served to me, right? So this is part of what I teach in all of my courses, is that we have to stop getting caught up in this concept that if we are trying to find an appropriate energetic exchange for our bodies, in other words, if we're trying to just eat an appropriate amount of food by saying no to big portions, taking half of this, making sure we're monitoring what we're putting in our bodies, that's not dieting. That's just in the face of what's happening in our culture all around us. We're set up to overeat. And not only are we set up to overeat, we're set up to overeat things that aren't good for us. So when someone talks to me about weight creep, I talk about, listen, it's probably just a accumulation of what we call a little here, a little there over time, right? And so the way we started this Healthy for the Holidays series, I let you know that the statistics show that, during this time over the holiday period, people put on what we would consider pretty minimal amount of weight, right? Let's call it 2 to 6 pounds, maybe 8 pounds, if depending on your size and height and current weight, which is, relatively minimal, but we never take it off, right? So that's the other key, is that once the body has weight on it, it likes that. So it's going to try and adjust its homeostasis to keep you there. And so what happens is it gets really comfortable with that and we never lose it, right? And so the accumulation of just a couple of pounds over the holidays over 10 years is 20 pounds. And that's not even, you haven't even really done anything, right? You're just a little holiday cookie here. Maybe I didn't go for a walk or move for that month. And then I just ate, a little bit more here and I gained a couple of pounds, but then I never lost it. And so, the woman who asked me this, I think she was saying it was over a couple of decades, and it can be as simple as that, right? So the point of this is not to say, oh my gosh, we have to be laser focused and, never have our weight fluctuate and monitor every calorie that goes in our body. If you know me, you know that that's not my philosophy in any way, shape, or form. But I'm also very practical and pragmatic in saying, look, part of the way I make my own personal food decisions every day is knowing that if I'm just served what's given to me, I'm overeating. I just am. And so I take intentional actions to make sure that I'm just getting an appropriate amount of energy, caloric intake for my body on a daily basis. That doesn't feel like dieting. I'm not in restriction. I'm not, for those of you who know my husband, God bless him, he can be a garbage dispenser, or a garbage disposal, whatever it is. He can eat a ton of food. And if I just ate like him, it wouldn't be good for my body. Right. And so that's okay. I don't look at it as, oh my gosh, why can he eat so much and I can't and whatever. That was a relationship with food mindset shift that I made a long time ago, that I'm not restricted or deprived just because I don't eat the same way he eats. It's not right for my body. And so I don't eat it that way because I don't feel good in my body when I'm overfeeding myself. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of you start to come to when you do these challenges and you really set into, wait a second, is it worth it? Is it really a restriction? What really serves me? What really do I want to spend my calories on? Those kinds of things. You start to get different information about, oh, wow, I actually don't feel that good when I consistently overfeed my body over time, right? So this whole process is not about putting you on a diet or, making sure that you're so narrowly restricted. The process is about helping you open your eyes to our relationship with food has gotten so skewed, partially because of the diet industry and partially because of the food environment. And I mean, there's other factors as well. And you put those things together and we have no idea who to be and how to be with food anymore. And that is my passion, teaching you all how to have a different relationship with food, which as I'm told, gives people a completely different experience of their lives, right? They start to think about food less. They start to be obsessed with food less. They start to enjoy food more, right? One of you just this week had a totally different experience with Halloween candy than you've had before, just by making the simple shift of, okay, if I'm going to eat this, I'm going to enjoy it, right? Anyways, I'm getting off on a tangent here, but hopefully that helped answer your question about how weight can creep on. It's super, super easy to overfeed ourselves if we're not paying attention. In fact, we're just pretty much set up that way in an obesogenic culture right now. Okay, I've kept you long. It is 20 minutes in. Next week, we start a new challenge. So take this challenge into the weekend. Just as a side note, these challenges are definitely meant to build on each other if you want. So you can habit stack. In other words, don't stop asking yourself if it's worth it for the sake of the next challenge. Keep doing it. Keep doing it where it feels good and where it keeps giving you good information. Okay, everyone, have a wonderful weekend. Actually, let me just check and make sure in the comments here that you guys have no comments before or no questions before I sign off. Okay, I think we're good. I don't see any questions. All right, we'll see you next week. Have a great weekend.